readers, welcome to Novels with Nat. Today I'm going to do my reading wrap up for the month of October and talk about the 8 books that I completed last month. In October, I had big plans to read a bunch of horror books and spooky books, but it didn't necessarily go 100% to plan. I had a DNF of the book that I had planned and saved to keep for Halloween night itself. I just really couldn't get into it, so that was a bit disappointing, but a lot of the other books I ended up picking up were just standard mystery and thrillers. I don't know, I just was in the mood for that this month. And so I did sprinkle in a couple of horror, but not as many as I wanted to get to. So let's just dive right in and get straight to the point. We're going to start off talking about some of my stats from last month, as always. Okay, so this month I finished 8 books and I had 1 DNF. So we can first look at the genre breakdown of my reading for this month. As usual, my main category was mysteries and thrillers. I read 5 of them. And then I read 1 of each of the following: horror, nonfiction, and literary fiction. And so like I said, I really wanted to read more horror, but the one that I read went okay, and then the second one that I had planned, I ended up DNFing, and then I just had some holds come in from my library for some mysteries and thrillers, and so I ended up just kind of reading those and going with what was available. And as a result, I didn't get to as many horror books as I was really hoping to in October, which is kind of disappointing, but I'm a mood reader, so I just kind of went with what I was feeling. And then if we look at my ratings for the month, not too bad, but not great. I had 1 2-star book, 1 2.5 star. I had 2 3 stars, 1 3.5, 1 4, and 2 4.5s. So I didn't have any new 5-star favorites, but I did have 2 4.5 stars, which were very close. So not horrible. And those ratings resulted in an average rating for the month of 3.38, which now that I'm looking at that is pretty low. So I'd like to have my average beat around 3.5 at least. So slightly under. So now let's go through each of the books that I read and I'll talk a little bit about them. I always go from my DNFs and lowest rated up until my favorites for the month. So let's start with my one and only DNF. So the book I DNF'd was actually the one that I had planned to be reading on Halloween night, and it is episode 13. I always try to pick strategically what book I want to be reading on Halloween, and so I had chosen this one this year because it's like a paranormal sort of haunted house type of story. We're basically following a group of filmmakers. They're basically like ghost hunters that are filming a TV show, and they go to different locations and they film an episode. And so in this one, episode 13, they're filming in this specific house, and it's kind of reality TV show meets horror and haunted paranormal. And so I just thought the premise of that sounded so good. And so I had saved this one for Halloween. So I started it about 2 days before Halloween so I could kind of get into it and kind of be a good chunk through by the 31st. And unfortunately, after the first day or day and a half, I pretty quickly decided to DNF it. I made it about 20% through. What I didn't know about this book is it's actually told in kind of like a mixed media format. It's got like interview transcripts and emails and things like that, and that's what's sort of how the story is being told. I have found out pretty quickly that I don't typically enjoy that style of writing. I have read one book before like that, which was Murder in the Family, and I ended up DNFing that one. And then I've tried this one, ended up DNFing it. And so that makes me a little bit nervous because I do have a couple of Janice Hallett books on my TBR. I've never read from that author, but she also writes in mixed media style. So I'm a bit nervous now that I might not really love that writing style. I just find that it makes me feel very disconnected from the story, and I don't have any investment in what's going on because it just feels kind of removed. You're not really in the character's mind or in the characters, like in the moment with the characters, and I just don't prefer that. So this one I had such high hopes for, but it ended up being a DNF. All right, and then if we go on to the books that I actually completed, I have one that I ended up giving 2 stars, and that is Cross Her Heart by Sarah Pinborough. This one, I honestly couldn't even tell you what this is about. It's completely gone out of my mind. I read this earlier in the month and I was so disappointed just because I have loved every other book that I've read by Sarah Pinborough. Behind Her Eyes, Insomnia, We Live Here Now. All of those books were like between 4.5 and 5 stars for me. And so I had such high hopes. I've been wanting to work my way through her backlist, and this one just really fell short. It was just such a basic standard thriller. There was nothing unique, there was nothing shocking. I was bored throughout most of the book. I just gave it 2 stars. I was really sad about it, but I'm moving on from it. All right, and then next we have a Frida McFadden book. I've also been slowly working my way through her backlist. I've got about 4 or 5 left to have completed all of her published books, or at least her published thrillers. I think she has a couple of women's fiction, which I'm not too interested in. But I did end up reading 2 of her books this month, and one of them was Do Not Disturb. This one I gave 2.5 stars. It wasn't terrible. I have definitely read worse from her, but it was just pretty standard down the middle. Nothing special, but nothing horrible. It was just pretty basic. I think the twist in this one had potential, but it was just one of those twists where it was just completely out of left field and it wasn't consistent with the characters and sort of their emotion and their thought processes. And then you just kind of get this twist and it's the complete opposite of what you've been building up to. And so I feel like the twist was put in for shock factor, but it wasn't actually well thought out and well executed sort of storyline wise. So that was my main issue with this one, but I did have a fine time reading it. It was entertaining enough, 2.5 stars. So now we move on to the 3-star books I had this month, and the first one was a memoir. This one was called Breaking Free by Rachel Jeffs. I think she was part of the FLDS religion, if I'm not mistaken. It kind of talks about her like growing up in this sort of really hyper restrictive environment and the abuse that went on within that. I do tend to read a lot of memoirs, so I always kind of sprinkle in a few every month. Just to reiterate, I always like to make sure it's clear that when I am rating a memoir, I'm not rating in any way the person's life story itself. I'm rating purely the writing style. And this one I thought was just okay. I feel like it was a little bit disconnected and disjointed in terms of the timeline of how the events were communicated. I just found it at times a little bit difficult to follow. So that wasn't my favorite. Also, the writing was a little bit simplistic. So it just was a middle of the road memoir for me. I gave it 3 stars. All right, and then my second 3-star book for the month was The Intruder by Frida McFadden. This is her newest release. I ended up reading it pretty quickly after it was published. I also did a book review on this one, which I will link down below if you're interested in more in-depth thoughts. That review is completely spoiler-free, so if you haven't read it yet, you can still watch it and it won't spoil anything for you. This book, again, was not a favorite from her, but not a least favorite, if that makes sense. I think my main issue with this one was that the twist, for me, and I think for most avid thriller readers, was very, very obvious. Like, I could tell what was going on from the first, 20% of the book. I don't think it had anything really shocking about it. I think if you're new to the thriller genre, you might not see it coming. And so you might really enjoy this twist and find it shocking. But I think for the avid thriller reader, again, it was fairly obvious. And so that did kind of affect my enjoyment a little bit because I guess I didn't have any kind of shock factor once the end came. But it wasn't terrible. It was a fine time. I gave it 3 stars. All right, now for a 3.5-star book, and that was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This one was the one horror that I actually completed this month, and it was fine. Again, I like Grady Hendrix's writing style. I find it kind of intriguing. It's campy horror, and I love that. But this one just didn't compare to me to How to Sell a Haunted House. That one I gave 5 stars and loved. This one I feel like was a lot more obvious and dragged on. It just didn't have that sort of shock factor that I was wanting, like I felt with the other book. But at the same time, I thought the sort of book club aspect was fun to read about. I loved the sort of suburban mom trope and them working together to slay vampires. It was just a fun read, but it wasn't one that's going to be super memorable. I think it's more of like a atmospheric, vibey kind of book, but it's not one that I would say is going to be like an all-time favorite. But it was perfect for October. There was some social commentary built into the book as well, which I think is nice, but was it done super tastefully? I don't think so necessarily. But yeah, 3.5 stars, not a new favorite. All right, now the next book I read, I gave 4 stars, and that is Seduction Theory. This is a new to me author. I've never read anything from this author before. This, I think, was a book of the month pick recently, and so I had heard a few people talking about it, and so I wanted to pick it up. It was a very strange book, and I don't think, while this is a book that I personally enjoyed myself and had a great time with, I wouldn't go around widely recommending this because I definitely think that I am in the minority. It has a pretty low rating on Goodreads right now, like low 3 point something. And I can totally see why. I think that this book is going to be very niche and it's not going to be widely enjoyed by the general population. This one was just weird, is all I can say. Um, it is the type of book that is completely plotless. Like, there is no plot to this book, it's just purely characters. And I sort of liked that messy character study sort of book. It reminded me a little bit of My Year of Rest and Relaxation, just that sort of like really character driven, plotless, kind of feels kind of pointless of a story, but then at the end you're like, wow, that actually was pretty good. Um, in this one, we're basically following a husband and wife duo who are professors, and they both sort of get entangled in relationships. The husband ends up cheating on his wife, and then the wife ends up sort of getting involved with one of her graduate students, sort of emotionally connecting with her, and we're sort of following this messy situation. Um, I loved it simply because I am obsessed with any sort of academia related book, whether that be dark academia, like fantasy, thriller, literary fiction, anything academia, I love in a book. And so I thought it was really well done in this one. It's also a really short book, so it really did pack a punch in a short number of pages. And it also felt like it was written in a way that I enjoyed. And it had a weird writing style, but it worked for me. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, but if you like a weird plotless book, try Seduction Theory. All right, now we have two more books to talk about. Both of them I gave 4.5 stars. They were so close to being all-time favorites, but just not quite there for a couple of reasons. The first one I'll talk about is What Happens in the Dark by Kia Abdullah. I love this author. I think she is such an underrated thriller author. She writes sort of courtroom, sort of procedural thrillers, which sounds surface level to be pretty boring, but she does it so well that you're completely engaged and captivated the entire way through. And as you're following this case unfold in the courtroom, you're just getting more and more details coming out, and it just sort of really pulls you in. I have read everything by this author except I have one book to finish her backlist, and I've enjoyed all of them so far. This one was probably, I would say, my second favorite of her backlist. My favorite is still Next of Kin, and then this one would be second. This one, again, similarly to the Frida McFadden book, I think this one was fairly obvious. I knew exactly what was happening from very early on in the story. I think the difference with this one was that even though I knew exactly what the twist was going to be, I still really enjoyed the process. I think, even though I knew at the beginning, okay, this I'm fairly certain is the twist, I didn't necessarily know the why. I knew the what, but not the why. And so it was fun to sort of read along and piece that together. And so I think in this one specifically, the predictability of it didn't really affect my enjoyment as much as the Frida McFadden one. But it still, for that reason, wasn't quite a 5 star because you get to the end, you really want that sort of shock factor, and I just didn't get that. The other thing is that in this book, we are sort of following two mysteries that are happening simultaneously. One of them ends up being solved, and that is the one that I kind of obviously predicted. The other one kind of is left open. And so I think that that's sort of being left as sort of perhaps a segue into a sequel. I don't know. But I kind of liked that open-endedness on that sort of secondary storyline. I'd be interested if there is going to be a sequel to pick it up. But I will say that if you're the type of reader that really wants for your book to be wrapped up with a neat little bow and have everything be concluded, this one might not be the book for you. All right, and last but not least, we have my final 4.5 star, and that was Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. This one I ended up reading because I've heard so many positive things about it. Everybody that I've seen talking about this has absolutely loved it. And so that's what I am looking for with a thriller. I'm looking for something new. And this one definitely was new. It felt like it didn't feel like every other thriller I've read this year. And so that's what I really enjoyed about it. I was just on the edge of my seat from the very beginning through to the very end. I read this one, I think, in like a day and a half. I was just completely captivated. In this one, we got multiple twists throughout the book. I will say that one of them I was completely shocked by and I did not see coming and I thought was really well done. A couple of them I did predict fairly early on. So overall, I would say that I think, again, that sort of predictability part of it is what slightly lowered my enjoyment. It could have been a 5 star, but I think one twist in particular, sort of a main one, was pretty obvious to me. And I'm starting to wonder if the thriller genre is, if I've just read so many thrillers that it's affecting my enjoyment, if that makes sense. Because I feel like once you've read a good number of thrillers, it's really hard to find one that does a twist that you can't see coming because you've read variations on that twist 100 times already. Um, and so that's what I'm finding more and more. It's becoming very difficult for me to find a 5-star thriller, but like a 4.5 is still very close. And so I was so close to giving this a 5, but not quite. I will also say that the middle did drag a little bit for me with this one. Um, so for those two reasons, I gave it 4.5, but it was so close to a 5, just not quite. All right, so that is all of the 8 books and 1 DNF that I had in October. I'm going to put up really quickly. I like to sort of look back at the TBR that I set for myself at the beginning of the month and see how well that I did or how much I stuck to that TBR. So this was my TBR that I had made for the month of October. It looks like I got to 5 of the 10 books, which is okay. So from my TBR, I read Southern Book Club, I DNF'd episode 13, Kill for Me, Kill for You, What Happens in the Dark, and The Intruder. And the books that I didn't get to are The Shining by Stephen King, House by Christina Lauren, Monstrulio, The Wishing Game, and The Making of Jackson Parrish, which is a novella prequel. So I always like to look back on my TBR and just see how well I did. Could have been better, could have been worse, so it is what it is. Alright, so that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Leave in the comments what was your favorite book that you read in the month of October, and what did you rate it? If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, like the video, and thank you so much for watching again, and I'll see you in the next video very soon. Bye!